We're back to the Lucasa board. This board, which generally takes either a rectangular or this sort of hourglass-shaped wooden form, is a device whereby those fort historians and members of the Mbuye Society are able to teach initiates into that society about the history of the Luba. They also refer to these when telling stories, when singing to the kings, etc. And the general shape is said to refer to the landscape. In a way, these are maps as well as memory devices. However, it's not as if one Mbuye Society member can see one of these from, say, another part of Luba land and read it. They are specific memory devices for the individual who created it or uses it or passes that knowledge on to specific people. In a way, it's as if everyone has their own individualized shorthand or secret code, because this is encoded information. Usually, one side of the board has beads and other kinds of carvings, like you're seeing here. And each of these represents something concrete. So that, for instance, when you look at certain colors of beads, their colors and sizes indicate various individuals. And there are also references to history, as well as the raised patterns that are almost like scarification. These are to associate names and places and events. The kinds of images that you see here, the colors of the beads refer to specific people, and these have to do with the dynastic lines of the areas involved. We'll go into it a little bit more. I have a diagram where one is red. Here is an Mbuye member, and he is using the Lucasa board, as you can see. The Mbuye have white chalk on them when they do these activities. That white chalk is sacred. It's an association with the spirit world. And of course, we have seen white chalk being used that way in a variety of contexts already. Now, the board that he has in his hand, he is pointing to different devices. As I said, they instruct new members of Mbuye in the history of the Luba past through the use of these boards. I want to correct something that I said a moment ago, and that is that I gave you one piece of wrong information. I left out one name when I was telling you about the founders of the kingdom. In Congolo, the despot who had a kingdom, the stranger who came in, the hunter, I gave you the wrong name. His name was Mbidi Kalue. He's the one that married Nkongolo's sister. And he had a son, Kalala Ilunga, who got rid of Nkongolo. So I was correct in saying Kalala Ilunga is the name to remember. He's the one that started a new kind of kingdom, but I had left out his father's name. Obviously, I did not have a Lucasa memory board, a very handy piece of equipment. Here we have the front and the back of a Lucasa. You can see the slight hourglass shape here, and a female head on top, which just makes it easy to carry without jarring the beads and other materials. This is full of beads and patterns. They have to do with migrations. It has also to do sometimes with the spirit capitals that we talked about, that are the homes of deceased kings. The back of the board is carved with patterns, and these patterns are usually referred to as being like the patterns on the back of a tortoise. And the tortoise is significant in that the Mbuye Society, when it was originally created, it was a woman who was one of the main inventors of Mbuye, and and she was someone who could transform into a tortoise. The references of the beads include references not only to kings, but also to chiefs, to sacred places. When there's a circle of beads, that's generally a sacred location. And this is also, it's a historical record that the Boudier Society members will use in song. Now, I mentioned that some of the things marked on here are those spirit capitals, the homes of kings that went on, and whose spirits then possessed an individual woman who then acted as their medium. In fact, here is one such woman, and when she would then occupy the former port and settlement of most people would be moved elsewhere, but the courtiers that assisted the king would remain, and the present king would send her gifts and tribute. And in the past, when she died, that office would be handed down, so that these spirit capitals of past kings would continue to act as ritual centers. But this woman was the very last of her kind. The photo was taken in, I think, either the 70s, I believe. She is now gone, and there are no longer women who fulfill this role. There are still Luba kings. There is still Luba divination, but many of these practices are falling by the wayside, particularly in the wake of the Civil War that has disrupted everything in DRC. Here, two more boards. One, you're seeing the markings that indicate people and places and historical information encoded. The other is showing you the back, in this case the tortoise's back indicated by these alternating sets of lines. And here, one of the images that is actually red. So you see the actual board on the right with all of its various bits and pieces, and the diagram of it with information provided to a researcher on the left. So I'm going to just mention to you some of the things. Here we have a reference to one of the spirit capitals. Here we have a road leading to a spirit capital. Here a reference to the praise name of a king, the branches of a tree, one of his praise names. Here we have references to female member of Boudier Society. Here a ruler and his two wives. This is a reference in bright blue or black to the hunter who came and his two wives, one of which produced the new king that toppled the uncle. Here, the royal residence. Here, just to jump down, a reference to a particular title holder who was historically important. Another cowrie shell referring to the head of the Boudier Society. Another bead referring to a title holder. We have a secret meeting house here. Another spirit capital with this cowrie. We have various lakes referred to. Lake for diviner. Lake for diviner. There are a lot of lakes in this area, by the way. The threshold initiates pass through. The male members of Boudier. Sacred trees in the king's capital and its compound. Clearings through the bush that lead to the spirit capital. Up here, a shrine house. So many different specificities for a given kingdom's history. This is an emblem that a king would have placed into the ground when he was sitting in state. You can see it's pointed at the bottom. It's made out of wood, female figure at the top. It's a staff, but it's not a staff that is carried. It is emblematic of his authority. And you'll notice that parts of it sort of resemble the Lukasa memory boards, even to the kinds of tortoise-like patterns on their surface, and perhaps the use of beads. This is atop of a different staff, this one with two female figures at the top. So this Reference of women, again, could be to the spirit mediums that occupy the spirit capitals of former kings, or just to the general idea that maybe it was once a matrilineage. Different axes and adzes. These are ceremonial weapons. They certainly were never used on wood. And they are owned not only by kings, but by title holders and other important persons. They don't hold them in their hands so much as they wear them on their shoulder with the blade facing the back. And they usually represent, again, women. Long torso here, similar pose that we saw on some of the stools. One of the most interesting royal objects is the bow stand. Now, the whole idea of the bow stand goes back to hunting. The father of the king who founded the present dynasty by overthrowing his maternal uncle, and perhaps who changed from matrilineage to patrilineage. Anyway, it is through a hunter that changes came to the kingdom. Hunters often bring new trade routes to an area. This particular hunter, this important dynastic hunter, is said to have brought new and improved ironworking technologies to the Luba. In any case, his identity as a hunter is critical to dynastic memory. And these tripod-headed figures, they're like a staff at the bottom thrust into the earth, are bow stands, that is, bow like bow and arrow. And they would be kept not near the king. These were not public items at all. These were hidden from almost everyone. They were kept in a little secret house within the palace compound, and it is also the house where the most important relics of past kings, that suggests bones, but I don't think foreigners were allowed in to see exactly what these relics were also in the same room. So a very sacred object. They would be hung with actual bows, and the bow and the stand would have sacrifices made to them, prayers would be said over them, and occasionally the king would visit this room. But the bow stand would never come out in public. However, when the king sat in public, the woman, because it's a priestess who tends the shrine, the woman who tends the shrine would come and stand by the king and hold a bow between her breasts. So she would act as a living bow stand. So presumably the female figure on these bow stands represent that titled woman who carries the bow and is the guardian of this shrine, a priestess. If you look at the patterns on the section that the bows actually would have been slung over, they are similar to those that we saw on the tortoise back of the yukasa. The female has a long torso, again, intensive scarification, real beadwork, the eyes, the bulging rounded forehead, the eyes set into a concavity that have the coffee bean protrusion and slit. She holds her breasts, and there is a saying that Luba women hold secrets in their breasts. They're not talking about general Luba women. They're talking about those women who are priestesses that are involved particularly with royal matters. Head to body proportions, let's see. 1, 2, 3, about 1 to 4 in this case. Now on the right we have another bow stand, same coffee bean eyes, same bulging forehead characteristic of the Luba, and you can see that a lot of Luba human representations have a sort of diamond-shaped face. Here a more abstract treatment of the shoulders and a swelling of the stomach that suggests pregnancy. Maybe a royal woman reference here. Here a detail of yet another bow stand. Very beautiful sculptures, though secret. Again, the rounded, broad forehead, the coffee bean eyes with their slit, smallish nose and mouth. The woman supports her breast, and has these many scarifications. They usually got these scarifications when they were teenagers going through puberty rites, but because they were meant to be attractive. Men would want to touch them. That would help them get a husband. And they would add to these scarifications throughout life. If you had a successful pregnancy, for example, you might have more scarifications made, and so forth. Here, a figure. There don't seem to be as many standing Luba figures as there are figures incorporated into other kinds of designs, but there are some, and here we have one such example. Again, a long torso, the legs rather short, scarifications. The woman holds her breasts, holding the secrets of the dynasty, really, in her chest, which the breasts, of course, are used to breastfeed, and therefore it is the way that those who become kings receive maternal love from their mothers. And we have the rounded forehead, the large eyes, in this case flattened, but still with slits, that give these works an introspective look. Some people say their eyes are closed. The artists are not intending to show eyes that are closed. It is just a stylized way of indicating the eye. Now here we have a figurative object that is not sacred or changed. Most of the others are royal or high status objects that do refer to dynasty and history and so forth. This, however, is a simple domestic object, although given beautiful volumetric treatment. It is a headrest. The Luba had very elaborate hairstyles in the 19th century, particularly, as you can see, and in order to keep, the hairstyle takes hours to make. You don't want to just lay your head down on the ground and glue it in one fell swoop. So these were in essence pillows. They supported either the neck or the cheek. You could lie on your back, you could lie on your side, and it would keep your hair from being smashed on the ground. If you didn't have an elaborate hairstyle, it would also help keep you cooler so that air can circulate. And we'll see a lot of headrests in Central Africa, where they are, in Central and East Africa, they are, and South, they are very common. West Africa, not as common, although there are some examples. Here we have two figures facing each other, and you'll notice what is really prominent is their hairstyle, which has these two flaring levels. Large hands. This hairstyle has given rise to another one of these designations of an artist, master of the cascade hairstyle, also active in the 19th century. You can see it's a rather angular artist in his approach, some sharp angles in arms, in the hairstyle, in the jutting of the lower part of the head. We still have the broad, full forehead. And it's referring to this hairstyle that you see was worn by both men and women, though it was women that seemed to have several tiers and men just one. These are late 19th century photographs, and this style has been exaggerated somewhat here, although you can see on this example, not by a tremendous amount. This is another work, or two views of the same work by the master of the cascade hairstyle. And it's really interesting to see the repetition of these sort of triangular forms through the two levels of the hairstyle, through the way the ear is treated. The nose becomes a triangle. The arms are a triangle, and so, of course, is the negative space between them. The angle of the bent knee creates another triangle in both positive and negative forms. So beautiful rhythms set up in this work, all based on sharp angles in the form of lines and triangular forms, even the breasts, in terms of shape. Real beads added to both the headrest, coiffure, and the neck and at the waist. Different artist, front and back of another headrest. Again, this is a 19th century form, and characteristically Kuba in the broad, rounded forehead, emphasized here by the eyebrows. Slightly different treatment of the eyes. the two women, apparently friends or sisters, and we have the scarification patterns on their torsos. Long torsos, very short legs. These are head to body proportions about 1 to 3. So we've seen some variation of 1 to 3, 1 to 4 in the Luba head to body proportions. It's interesting how the artist in the back of this shows the scapula very accurately when you put your arms around each other, how those bones stand out. And we can see that cross-shaped hairstyle that we looked at earlier in the slide program. Here, yet another headrest, a kneeling figure, real beads, the rounded forehead, large eyes, and intense scarification patterns. So this is a caryatid headrest, as are the other ones we looked at. Now I want to mention a little bit about divination. The Luba had several forms of divination, and if you might remember from the film at the museum, that was a film taken in the 80s showing divination by the same art historian that took these shots, so we may even be seeing some of the same people. There's a set of royal diviners, and we are seeing them here. They tend to wear beaded and feathered or furred headdresses, and these beaded patterns are said to refer to lakes, these spirit capitals. You can see they've got the Pemba chalk, the sacred chalk, that helps them in their back and forth travels to the other world on face and torso here, and just in lines on the face here, opening up their eyes to the other world. A calabash holds a variety of objects, and how they fall when shaken is what these diviners interpret. Here you can see one of the beaded headdresses when it's off the wearer, and diamond patterns on it. Here yet another one. Here's the diviner, the royal diviner. He has several bowls and calabashes that he shakes. There's another royal diviner there. The diviners often use their wives as part of the divination process. The wives can act as spirit mediums, or they can hold the bowls and other equipment when the diviner has paused to communicate with his client. They, in short, are a full part of the divination process. And there are a number of artworks that depict these wives, presumably, as bowl bearers. We saw one at the museum in the Central African show. Here is another one, slightly different facial style here, with the teeth showing, which is not something we have seen in other work. Scarifications, the legs are outstretched. That's actually the way women sit on mats in this area. She's holding a bowl, and often the bowl was actually used to hold that sacred chalk. So it would be placed on both the diviner and the client during the process. Even this work that we already saw as a work of the Booley master has a bowl and was probably used in this kind of way. I should mention here that the area where this work is from, I describe it as a Luba work because that's how it's usually described, but it actually is on the borderland of the Luba and the Hemba, and we're going to be looking at the Hemba shortly. Many of the satellite groups around the Luba had close relationships with them through trade and marriage alliances and political alliances. And so we are going to see that the Luba had a strong stamp elsewhere. So while I call this Luba because most of my colleagues do, there are those who refer to it as Hemba, and we'll explore what that means in the next lecture. Royal divination is not the only type of divination that takes place. This is another type which exclusively has female diviners. It's a non-royal type, and in it both diviner on the right and client on the left hold on to a little wooden carving that is passed back and forth on a mat. And when it stalls or has certain behaviors, that's how the diviner will interpret the meaning of the message. They both hold on to it at the same time, and that is why has this central open area, so one person holds it on one side, one on the other. These generally have a high degree of patina because they were handled so much. And they normally show a female figure, probably one of the diviners. So when you see this kind of object, you know it was a divination instrument used with a friction kind of interpretation. There are a number of sacred objects that held medicine that Luba diviners and other ritual specialists use. We may not know their specific functions. They generally have a calabash or some other container filled with medicines attached to them. And often there will be a carved human element at the top. So here we have that female holding her breasts, confiding her secrets. Here we can't even see the breasts of the figure, so I can't be sure what they're doing. Some of these are incredibly beautiful. This one has multiple heads and the attachment of porcupine quills. They're together holding a bowl, a joint bowl on their head with medicines inside, and there's probably a calabash under these pieces of leather, as there is here, and the medicinal elements are within the calabash. The Luba had masks, or did have masks. The masks are still around. The masquerades are not performed as frequently. Some types are no longer performed at all, although one type is. So we don't always know how these were used and what their contexts were, because some types have been abandoned for a very long time. I just want to show some of them to you and mention a few things. Here we have two in human form, and you'll notice they have something in common with the figurative sculpture we've been seeing. The broad rounded forehead, the large eyes, relatively small nose and mouth, and the intricate hairstyles. Here, an unusual one. This is a 19th century example. We really don't know how it was used, but it has a ram's horns or a hairstyle styled that way, and appears to have a beard. So this seems to be a male representation. The eyes set in that depression with the coffee beans slit, but we don't know anything about how it was used. So 19th century Luba mask, that's it. There is another type of mask that is still performed, or was performed more recently, a much more abstracted human form. And we're going to see similar masks amongst the Songye people. They're another group that borders the Luba and shares certain traits with them. They're far better known amongst the Songye, but we can't assume, even though they bear the same name, Kifwebe, K-I-F-W-E-B-E, we can't assume that they have the same meaning or use. It could be a stylistic borrowing. There's not much has been written about the Luba examples. These are performed, well, not in pairs exactly, but they're said to be male-female. This is a female, the round one. And they're very graphic with these repetitions of curved lines, geometric treatment of the facial features, and they were worn with a raffia costume, as you can see in this example. This is the female one. The male one has a more rectangular bottom, and again a geometric treatment, certainly of the mouth with incised lines. I can't tell you very much about this, nor can I tell you much about some of the other kinds of masks, which included a variety of animal masks, and even some masks made in a basketry style with inserted teeth. Now, why can't I tell you much about them? For as big as the Luba are, and as much study as there has been of their art, because their art was collected early and is still very much admired, particularly by the Belgians and French, hard research into the functions was not really conducted at an early age. There's some work done. Tourday did a little bit, but most Luba research that has been extremely useful and illuminating was done by the American scholar Polly Roberts, whose video we saw, and whose one of whose publications you read. She's done a lot of work with the Luba. But here I want to clarify why it is we know so much about some things and not about others. Luba territory is big. When you go to do research for a year or two, you generally look around and find a place that you consider congenial, and you work with the people there for the entire time. You may do a little work in some nearby villages and so forth, but you do not spend your time going from pillar to post throughout the entire territory occupied by an ethnic group. It's not practical, not just in terms of finances and ease of travel, but it's not practical in terms of the fact that you have to establish relationships in order to get information. You don't just walk up to somebody and say, hey, what's this used for? Have you ever seen this before? You cultivate friendships with people, and that's when they start to talk to you, and you to them, and you find out things. So unless you have a researcher interested in those kinds of things, and not just one researcher, but like 15 of them in a variety of places, are you going to get full information? Some areas are better researched than others. And because DRC has had a series of wars, first civil war back in the 60s, all kinds of unrest, then another civil war that isn't completely over yet, researchers don't necessarily want to go there. The people who lived there and who brought a lot of these objects back at the beginning of the century did so under colonialism, and many of them only wanted the objects. They did not care about the movie. So I just wanted to explain to you a little why it is we have certain information and not others. And even if someone were to go to DRC now, what you can retrieve about objects made in the 19th century is much more limited than the 20th. And how much art the Luba are making and what it looks like right now, as opposed to the late 80s when Holly Roberts did her work, is unclear. Okay, our third and final recorded lecture for Friday will deal with some of these groups around the Luba and the similarities and distinctive qualities of their arts.